The land was wide enough to swallow secrets. It stretched in every direction, flat and unforgiving, yet beautiful in its own harsh way. The prairie breathed in silence, only the whisper of wind through dry weeds breaking its stillness. And on that road, where dust rose at each weary step, a lone woman walked. Her boots were worn thin. The soles had kissed too many miles, and the leather had lost its shine long ago. Yet she carried herself with dignity, not the kind polished by wealth or finery, but the stubborn sort that clings to the spirit even when the body is tired. Her dress, once blue, had faded into a pale gray, sun-bleached and frayed at the edges. The satchel on her shoulder held little: a comb, a scrap of cloth, a few coins that rattled like hollow echoes. Still, she moved forward as if the dust itself asked her to keep going. The sun lowered on the horizon, bleeding into shades of copper and gold. Evening shadows reached across the land like long fingers, and with them came the weight of loneliness. But she had carried loneliness before. It was no stranger. It had sat with her through nights when hunger gnawed at her belly. It had followed her from the town she once called home, where illness and debt had stripped her of everything. Her father had died first, then her mother not long after, and when the land they'd farmed could no longer be paid for, it was sold off piece by piece until nothing remained but memories she could not eat. Now the world saw her as a poor woman drifting from place to place. Yet beneath her silence was a resilience sharper than any blade. The world may underestimate her, but she had learned to keep walking. Always walking. By the time she saw the ranch, the sky was painted in bruised purples. A wooden fence framed the land, and horses grazed lazily within, tails swishing against the evening flies. Smoke curled gently from the chimney of a large house, a promise of warmth. Her feet faltered. She knew what it meant to approach a door, the look she might receive, the questions, the quick dismissal. Still, hunger gnawed, and the thought of shelter pulled her forward. She stood at the door, hesitant, listening to the faint creak of the house against the night breeze. For a long moment she only breathed, in and out, steadying herself. Then, gathering the last of her courage, she lifted her hand and knocked. The sound was small, yet in her chest it thundered. The door swung open, and in its frame stood a man, broad-shouldered, tall, his face carved by sun and wind. A cowboy, unmistakably, boots dusted, shirt rolled to the sleeves, a pistol at his belt more for habit than necessity. His eyes were sharp, the kind that measured a person quickly and without mercy. She swallowed, voice soft but steady. "I came to ask if you've need of work. I can cook, clean, sew, tend to animals if need be. I ask only for fair wages, or a meal, if nothing more." The man leaned against the frame, arms crossing. His gaze traveled from her worn boots to the frayed hem of her dress, to the satchel hanging like an afterthought. There was no kindness in his pause, only a calculation, as if weighing what little she had left. Then came his words, flat as stone. "Only position here is wife." The air seemed to shift, heavy with his meaning. Not a proposal, not an invitation. A jest sharpened into dismissal. To him, she was not a worker, not a soul-seeking dignity, just another woman without value beyond what he could claim. Her breath caught, though she did not let him see the wound. For a heartbeat she stood, rooted in humiliation. She thought of how many doors had closed before this one, how many looks had reduced her to nothing more than desperation dressed in tattered cloth. His words pressed on old scars, the kind the world leaves on women who carry too much silence, too much pride to beg. But she would not give him her breaking. She lifted her chin, though her voice trembled like a candle in wind. "Then I thank you for your time." And she turned. The man did not call after her. Perhaps he smirked. Perhaps he forgot her the moment the door closed. But she carried his words like stones in her satchel, heavier with each step she took back into the dimming light. The road stretched again before her, long and merciless. The sun slipped away, replaced by stars that blinked faint and cold. Her figure was small against the wide prairie, but there was something unyielding in her stride. Because even when the world laughed, even when it spat in her face, she kept walking, always walking. The night deepened, and the prairie held its breath. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote called, its cry echoing across the emptiness. The woman did not flinch. She pulled her shawl tighter, pressing it against the bones of her shoulders, and whispered softly to herself. Not prayer, not complaint, but something more like a promise. That she would endure. That she would find a place where her hands, her heart, her worth were not measured by cruelty. Behind her, the ranch lights dimmed until they were swallowed by the horizon. Ahead, the road opened into the unknown, each step carrying her closer to something she could not yet name. And though the world may have seen only a poor woman wandering in dust, the prairie itself seemed to know. Within her walked a story yet to be told. The prairie does not speak in words, yet has a language. In the hush of dawn, when the first light drapes itself across the land, the silence feels like a hymn. That is when she walked again, the poor woman with the tired boots, carrying her dignity like a fragile lantern against the dark. Her body ached, her feet begged her to rest, but her spirit, her spirit still whispered forward. By midday the sun blazed cruelly. Heat pressed on her shoulders, and dust clung to her lips until they cracked. Hunger hummed low in her belly, and for a moment she thought perhaps this would be her end, not in violence or calamity, but in the quiet suffocation of being forgotten on the open land. But then she saw it. Another ranch, smaller than the one before. Its fences leaned with age, but the horses inside were well-fed and calm. The house stood simple. No proud porch, no carved posts, only wood weathered to gray by years of sun. Smoke drifted from its chimney, the promise of warmth and bread. She hesitated. Her heart remembered the last door. The man's eyes, sharp and measuring. His words that stung like nettles. She pressed her hand against her satchel, as if it could anchor her. Then, gathering the remains of her courage, she walked the path to the door. Her knock was lighter this time, as though bracing for the weight of rejection. The door opened. This man was different. He was younger than the first, though not by much. His hair was dark, his frame strong, but not imposing. His eyes, that was the difference. They were steady, quiet, like a river that does not boast of its depth, but carries it all the same. He studied her, but not as if she were an object to be measured, more as though he were listening before she had even spoken. She lowered her gaze, words soft. I came to ask if you might have need of hands. I can work for little. I'll cook, clean, tend the animals. There was no laugh, no cruel jest. Instead, he opened the door wider and stepped aside. His voice was calm, almost gentle. Come inside. You need food first. She blinked, stunned by the absence of cruelty. Slowly, she entered. The air inside smelled of wood smoke and bread. A table stood plain but clean, a chair worn from use. The man set before her a plate with cornbread and beans. He did not watch her eat with suspicion. He did not hurry her. He only moved about the kitchen quietly, as if it were the most natural thing to welcome a stranger. Her eyes stung, though she would not let the tears fall. For days, she had been seen only as a burden. Here, for the first time in many miles, she was simply seen. After she finished, she set her hands on her lap. I will earn this meal. I can scrub your floors, wash clothes, mend what needs mending. He shook his head. Tomorrow will be soon enough. Tonight, you rest. And so she did. The days unfolded like pages, slow and steady. She began to work around the ranch, sweeping, scrubbing, cooking what little she could from his pantry. Her hands, though calloused, worked with care. She fed the horses, speaking softly to them as if they too carried burdens. The man, this quiet cowboy, did not hover. He did not question her past, nor pry into her pain. He simply allowed her presence. And yet she noticed things. How he repaired his fences without complaint. How he touched his horses with patience, never raising his voice. How he sat in the evenings by the lamplight, reading from a worn Bible, though his lips did not move with every word. There was something steady in him, something the world had not yet broken. One evening, as the sky bruised into violet, an old ranch hand wandered into the yard. His hair was white, his steps slow but certain. He greeted her kindly, tipping his hat. "So you're the one he's let stay," the old man said with a smile. "That's a rare thing, miss. He don't often keep folks close." She asked no questions, though her heart stirred. What did it mean to be let stay? That night, she stood on the porch, the prairie stretching wide and star-filled before her. She whispered a prayer not for fortune, but for dignity, the kind of dignity that does not vanish when the world turns cruel. Behind her, the door opened. The cowboy stepped out, quiet as always, and stood beside her. He did not speak. He did not need to. The silence between them felt safe, as though words would only cheapen it. But word travels, even across the endless plains. At the small trading post in town, the whispers had begun. The first rancher, the one who turned her away, let his voice carry. He told others of the poor woman who came knocking at doors, begging for scraps, until one man finally kept her out of pity. He laughed when he said it, painting her as desperate, shameless. And people, eager for gossip, listened. By the time she next walked into town, heads turned. Women's eyes slid over her with suspicion. Men's gazes carried something harsher, the unspoken judgment of a world that loves to see the fallen stay fallen. She felt the sting of it, but said nothing. She kept her chin steady, bought flour with the little she had earned, and returned to the ranch. The cowboy must have noticed her silence that evening, though he asked nothing. Instead, he set a mug of coffee by her side as she sat by the fire. A simple act, yet in its quietness, it felt like protection. Days blurred into weeks. She grew stronger, her cheeks less hollow, her step less weary. She began to laugh with the young stable boy who helped on the land, a boy who adored her cooking and followed her like a pup. She listened to the old ranch hand's stories, nodded at his wisdom. Slowly, she became part of the rhythm of that place. But in the deep hours of night, when the fire burned low, she still remembered the sting of that first door. The cowboy's mocking words. "Only position here is wife." It lingered like a wound. Yet in the quiet man she now worked beside, she saw another truth forming, that not all men saw women as shadows to be owned. Some saw them as souls. And that truth, though fragile, began to root itself in her heart. One evening, under the vast spread of stars, she stepped onto the porch again. The cowboy followed after a while, his boots soft on the wood. They stood side by side, the prairie wind cool against their faces. She whispered, almost to herself, "I used to think I carried nothing, that I was nothing. But maybe I was wrong." He didn't answer, not with words. He only looked out into the horizon, his silence saying more than language could. And she realized then, it was not in grand gestures, but in the quiet presence of someone who stayed, that healing began. The prairie had shifted with the season. Grasses that once bowed dry and brittle now held the faintest tint of green. The rains had been scarce, but they had been enough. And just as the land began to stir, so too did something quiet awaken between the woman and the man whose home she now kept. It was not sudden. Love, when it is real, seldom arrives like lightning. It arrives like dawn, slow, steady, gentle, brushing first the edges before it fills the sky. She began to notice small things. When her hands were raw from scrubbing, she found a tin of salve left on the table, no words attached. Where her boots cracked further, she woke to find them mended, stitches neat though clearly done by hands more used to reins and rope. He never mentioned these things. He only continued on with his chores, as though nothing had been done. And she, though wary of gratitude that felt like debt, felt warmth bloom in her chest. There were mornings when they worked side by side. He would chop wood while she stacked it. He would carry feed to the barn while she laid down hay. They spoke little. Words were not always necessary when the rhythm of labor held its own conversation. Yet when he did speak, it was never to command or correct. It was to ask her thoughts, to listen, to offer respect in a world that seldom gave it to her. Once, as they mended a fence together, he glanced toward her, voice low. "You hold more strength than most men I've met." Her lips curved faintly, though her eyes looked away. Strength don't count for much when you've nowhere to set it down. He said nothing more, but his silence was not empty. It was filled with the weight of understanding. Her laughter returned first in fragments. A small smile at the young stable boy's clumsy jokes. A light chuckle at the old ranch hand's stubborn complaints about his aching knees. And once, only once, a fuller laugh slipped free when a stubborn goat chased the cowboy in circles, refusing to be corralled. He had grinned then, rare and fleeting, but enough to make her heart ache with something she hadn't felt in years. At night, she found herself humming old songs by the fire. She had forgotten she knew them. He would sit nearby, never interrupting, simply letting the sound fill the quiet. Those evenings felt softer than any silk, though the room was bare and the firewood cracked loud. But joy in this world seldom walks without shadow. The first cowboy, the one who turned her away with cruel words, had not let go of his pride. At the trading post, his voice grew louder, his sneers sharper. He told anyone who would listen that she had come begging at his door first, that she had offered herself for work like a desperate stray. He claimed she stayed now at the other ranch only because she sought the easy path of a roof and a man's favor. The town, ever eager for stories that weren't their own, drank in his words. The whispers reached her ears sooner than she wished. Women glanced away when she passed, lips pursed. Men muttered, half laughing, as though she were both shame and spectacle. She bore it in silence. She had known worse. But silence has its cost, and each whisper was a stone added to her burden. One evening, as she set bread on the table, her hands trembled. The cowboy noticed. He did not ask, but later, as they sat on the porch beneath the stars, she spoke. They think I came here to cling to whatever man would have me, that I'm nothing but a beggar in a woman's skin. He was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, simply, let them think what they wish. I know the truth. Tears stung her eyes, though she turned her face away. And what truth is that? That you asked for work, and that you've earned every piece of bread in this house. You don't take, you give. And anyone who can't see that has blindness I can't cure. His words did not erase the whispers, but they lit a fire inside her, small, steady, enough to warm the places that had grown cold. The turning point came at the town's gathering. Once a month, the community met for a barn dance and supper. She had hesitated to go, but the old ranch hand urged her. You can't live on work alone, miss. You need laughter, too. Don't let the likes of him steal that from you. And so she went, her dress mended though still plain. The cowboy rode with her, not speaking much, but his presence was a shield in itself. Inside the barn, lanterns glowed golden, music from fiddles and banjos lifting the air. For a while, she almost forgot her shame. She spoke with the stable boy's mother, shared smiles with children running about. When the music swelled, she even let the cowboy guide her in a dance. His hands were firm yet respectful, his steps careful as though he feared to tread on her dignity. For the first time in years, she felt something close to belonging, until the voice came. The first cowboy, leaning against a post, smirk on his face. Loud enough for all to hear, he called, "Careful, friend. That one came knocking on my door first, begging for work. Only position she wanted was a roof over her head. Looks like you've taken her in well enough." The music faltered. Eyes turned. The air thickened with the cruel weight of gossip. Her cheeks burned. For a moment, shame threatened to crush her. The same shame she had carried from door to door, town to town. But before silence could choke her completely, the quiet cowboy spoke. She asked for work, his voice steady, carrying across the barn. And she's earned her place. Every day. Don't mistake her dignity for weakness. A hush fell. His words, simple yet sharp, cut through the smirks, the whispers. The first cowboy shifted, eyes narrowing, but he did not reply. The crowd, sensing tension, let the music stumble back to life, though softer. Her hands trembled, but not from shame this time. From the realization that someone had spoken for her, not to diminish her, but to honor her. That night by the fire, she sat in silence. He joined her, neither speaking. After a long while, she let herself lean, just slightly, until her head rested against his shoulder. He did not move, did not question. He simply remained. And in that stillness, something inside her broke, not in pain, but in release. For the first time, she felt the burden lift, even if only a little. The prairie stretched wide and unchanging. Yet within her, change had begun. Blossoms and dust, fragile but real. And though she did not yet dare to call it love, she knew this. Safety had finally found her. The prairie knows storms long before they break. Clouds gather at the edge of the horizon, heavy and swollen with unrest. The cattle shift uneasily in their pens. The horses toss their heads, and even the air grows tight, waiting. So it was in those days after the dance. The woman carried herself lighter now, her steps less weary, her eyes holding flickers of smile. The quiet cowboy's words had stitched something inside her that had been frayed for too long. Yet beneath it all, there was still the echo of scorn, the shadow of the first man who had cast her out with cruel laughter. And storms, once seated, find their way to thunder. It was a night of restless wind when it happened. The lanterns flickered in the house, and the shutters rattled against their frames. She was setting a pot by the fire when a hard knock struck the door. The cowboy rose, steady as ever, and pulled it open. There he stood, the first rancher. His face was twisted with pride and bitterness, the kind of bitterness that grows when a man believes the world owes him more than it has given. "I've come for what's mine," he said, his eyes sliding toward her. Her breath caught, but she did not step back. "I was never yours." The man's laugh was sharp, cruel. "You came begging at my door. Don't pretend you're more than that. You don't belong here. Not with him, not in this town. Folks talk, you know. They say you're just hanging on to his kindness, waiting until he makes you his wife. Is that the game you play?" The cowboy's hand flexed it aside. For a moment, anger rippled through him like heat lightning. But he did not step forward. His voice, low and steady, cut through the storm outside. "You've said enough. Leave." But the man only sneered, his pride unwilling to be dismissed. "You defend her? A drifter with nothing but a face too stubborn to quit? She's not worth the dirt under your boots." Silence. Heavy, pulsing. The fire crackled on the hearth. And then she stepped forward. Her voice was clear, not loud, but strong enough to carry. "You're right about one thing. I came begging at your door. I came with nothing but these hands, hoping to trade work for bread. And you told me the only place for me was at your side as wife. Not as a worker, not as a person, but as something to own. That's the truth of you." She lifted her chin, eyes steady, even as her heart pounded. "And here is the truth of him. He gave me food without asking my story. He let me work, let me earn my place. He sees me, not as broken, not as desperate, but as someone worth listening to. That is the difference between you and him. And that is why I'll stay." The first rancher's face hardened, the blow of her words sharper than fists. For a moment, he seemed ready to strike, to unleash his anger. But the quiet cowboy stepped closer then, not with violence, but with the stillness of a man who would not move aside. "Go home," he said, calm as stone, "before the storm breaks over you." And perhaps it was the steadiness in his voice, or the truth in her words, or the weight of the storm building outside. But the man faltered. He muttered something bitter, turned, and vanished into the night. The door closed. Silence returned, broken only by the wind outside. She stood there trembling, not from fear, but from the release of it all. The cowboy looked at her, his eyes soft, as though he had always known this strength in her, and only waited for her to see it herself. The storm broke that night. Rain lashed against the roof, thunder rolled across the prairie. But inside the little house, warmth held steady. They sat by the fire, neither speaking of the man, nor the cruelty, nor the shame. Instead, they sat close, the air between them heavy with a truth that no longer needed hiding. At last he spoke, quiet as always. "Stay. This land feels different with you here." Her throat tightened, but no words came. Instead, in the morning, she let her answer show. She knelt by the porch, pressing seeds into the damp earth left by the rain. Flowers, fragile and stubborn, would grow there, and with them, the proof of her choice. The days that followed carried a peace she had not known in years. The whispers in town did not vanish overnight, but they no longer cut her to the bone. She had faced them, answered them, and found something stronger. In time, the prairie itself seemed to bloom around her. The house, once plain and weathered, now rang with her humming, the scent of bread, the laughter of the stable boy at her side. The cowboy, still quiet, carried his work as he always had, but with a softness at the edges, a gentleness that grew only when love begins to shape a man. And she, the poor woman who once wandered dusty roads with nothing but a satchel and pride, found herself rooted, not as a beggar, not as a burden, but as herself. The narrator's voice slows now, as though leaning closer by the fire. Sometimes the world will only see what you lack. It will name you desperate, unworthy, less than whole. But there will come a day, if you keep walking, if you do not let the cruel voices hollow you out, when someone will see not what you lost, but what you carried through the storm. And in that gaze, you will find home. The prairie wide and golden in the morning sun, smoke curling from the chimney, a woman kneeling to water the flowers she planted, a cowboy beside her, his hand brushing gently against hers as they stand, their laughter faint, carried by the wind across the endless land. A story finished, yet not ended, because life on the prairie always goes on. And if this tale found a place in your heart, dear listener, I ask you, let me know in the comments. Tell me where in this wide world you're listening from. If you wish to hear more Wild West tales, of resilience, of love, of truth carved in dust and wind, then like, share, and subscribe. For the fire still burns, and many more stories wait to be told.